Let me right at the outset state the fact that the consistent policy position of the Samagi Jana Balawega has always been that Sri Lanka needs a robust, effective national security framework without compromising on human rights and democracy. We have stated our position in June 2021 in a very public statement, and also in my letter to Honourable Sumandira, we have reiterated it. So we firmly believe that this fair balance has to be established. Madam Chairman, the PTA was enacted as a Temporary Provisions Act for a period of 6 months in 1979, yet this law has remained in Sri Lanka's statute books for 43 years. We believe that it is outdated and it's a draconian piece of legislation that is not fit for its purpose. The purpose being protecting Sri Lanka's national security interests while respecting the constitutional rights of all peoples in Sri Lanka. The PTA, as it stands right now, has many serious weaknesses, and 4 of them stand out. Let me elaborate on those 4 points, if I may. First, it permits long-term detention up to 18 months without trial. Section 9(1) of the PTA. Second, it dispenses with the requirement to produce a suspect before a magistrate within 48 hours if a detention order is issued. Section 7(1) of the PTA. A suspect may therefore be kept in custody for 18 months without production before a magistrate. Third, it denies bail to the accused once the indictment is served in the High Court. Section 15(2) of the PTA. It makes confessions to police officers admissible as evidence, thereby incentivizing the abuse of suspects in custody. Section 16(1) of the PTA. And, Honourable Minister, the burden of proving that a confession was made under duress falls on the hands of the accused. Section 16(2) of the PTA. These weaknesses have enabled the persecution of political opponents, journalists, lawyers, human rights activists who pose no actual threat to national security. So we firmly believe that the egregious harm committed by certain sections of this particular legislation must be amended, must be repealed. And of course, considering the national security considerations, we also sincerely believe in replacing it. So it's not mere repeal and replace. Mr. Minister, let me give you an example. Way back in 2009, do you remember the episode with regard to J.S. Thissanayagam? Do you recollect that? He was convicted solely on a purported confession he gave to the police. Not a single shred of evidence other than that was presented in courts. President Barack Obama went to the extent of naming this case on World Press Freedom Day. So following international pressure, the then President Mahinda Rajapaksa pardoned Thissanayagam in 2010. The act of pardon in itself proved that he was in reality never actually posing a threat to national security. It is a clear-cut, unambiguous example of the PTA being weaponized to target a journalist that was critical of the government rather than the actual terrorists. Another example is the arrest and detention of Lawyer Hejaaz Hizbullah. Once again, this person, an eminent lawyer, was targeted because he was critical of the government. May I remind this noble house that Hejaaz Hizbullah was one of the pioneer legal representatives who championed the cause of democracy in appearing on behalf of the legitimate government at that time, the Yahapalanaya government. When you yourselves, on the other side of the political aisle, used extra-constitutional means and manipulation of constitutional procedures to grab governmental power. That was the sole reason why Hejaaz Hizbullah was arrested, victimized, and I would go to the extent of saying that he was terrorized. That should not be the case. Honorable Minister, what should you be doing? You should be going after the brains behind the Easter Sunday attack. You should be going behind those terrorists who committed that heinous crime. That's what you should do. But unfortunately, the authoritarianism that exists within our Sri Lankan polity has induced all of you all to get together and embark on a surge of political victimization activities simply using the PTA. So these examples clearly demonstrate that PTA's legacy is primarily one of abuse and selective application to target dissenting voices. Mr. Minister, another reason to repeal the draconian aspects of PTA is that it stands as an insult to Sri Lanka's independent judiciary. Judicial power cannot be exercised by officials of the executive. This is a violation of the doctrine of separation of powers. The several weaknesses mentioned above specifically impact on the independence of the judiciary. They deprive judicial officers of powers afforded under ordinary law and place undue authority in the executive branch. This is a violation of Article 4C of the Constitution, which provides that the judicial power of the people shall be exercised by Parliament through courts. Let me give you several examples. Under ordinary law, the evidence ordinance, a confession may be made only to a magistrate, whereas under PTA, a confession may be made to a police officer ranking not below the rank of Assistant Superintendent of Police. Under ordinary law, the Criminal Procedure Code, a suspect must be produced before a magistrate within 24 hours, and in some cases 48 hours of arrest. This provision enables a judicial officer to inspect the condition of the suspect and oversee the investigation. But the PTA strips this power away from the judiciary and deprives it of any meaningful oversight. The new PTA amendment proposals only enables magistrates to visit places of detention, but that does not guarantee any oversight, as it places the onus on magistrates to travel to detention centers rather than on detaining authorities to produce a suspect before the magistrate. It is not practical for magistrates to travel to detention centers to get any real impression of how the suspect is being treated. The reason that the ordinary law requires the suspects to be produced in court before a magistrate is that it is in the court and outside the place of detention that suspects may have the ability to inform magistrates about ill treatment. Moreover, under ordinary law, the Bail Act, a trial judge has the power to consider a suspect's bail application, whereas the PTA, the trial judge, is stripped of that power. So, Honourable Minister, these provisions reflect an undue and totally unconstitutional lack of trust in the competence and capacity of judicial officers to make appropriate decisions. So I invite you to place your trust in the Sri Lankan judiciary. We have a unique judiciary. We have a noble judiciary. We have an impartial judiciary. If you agree with my contention, please walk the talk. None of the above four issues are addressed within the proposed amendments to the PTA that have been placed on the order paper of Parliament. Therefore, the proposed amendments ought to be rejected in toto, and that is our position, the position of the SJB, and the position of the SJB Alliance. Previously, the SJB has clearly stated that it does not merely wish to point out the failings of the present government without offering viable solutions. In this context, the 2016 proposals of the Sri Lanka Law Commission should be considered as a starting point to repeal and replace the current PTA. The Law Commission is a body comprising eminent members of Sri Lanka's legal fraternity. The proposals were developed by the Commission when it was chaired by eminent lawyer, President's Counsel, Mr. Romesh De Silva, and even eminent lawyers such as Manohara De Silva, Sanjeeva Jayawardena. They were all members of this particular body. The proposals and suggestions are concise and effective and are compatible with international best practices. In these proposals, each of the main weaknesses of the PTA have been addressed. Section 4.2 of the proposals requires that a suspect be produced before a magistrate within 72 hours of arrest. Section 4.4 gives the magistrate the authority to decide whether a person should be released on bail, which is entirely in keeping with the doctrine of separation of powers. Moreover, the High Court has the power to grant bail when the suspect is produced before the High Court and even after the trial has begun. Section 5.1 provides that the maximum detention period is 30 days upon a detention order being issued by the minister, after which the suspect must be produced before the High Court. The High Court has the power to remand the person into police custody for a further maximum period of 28 days. Section 7 provides that suspects can make confessions to a magistrate, and the magistrate is empowered to satisfy themselves about the voluntariness of the confession. Therefore, these proposals can be developed into a simple and precise National Security Act for Sri Lanka, which effectively balances national security interests, fights against potential terrorism and existing terrorism, if it so exists, with constitutional rights of all persons including their civil liberties. Now, Mr. Minister, there was a time when an alternative approach was adopted, the counter-terrorism bill. I personally had certain reservations, precisely because I believe law, statutes, especially with regard to countering terrorism and protecting national security interests, have to be precise, nimble, and fit for its purpose. I had a
Honourable Member, you
contra-opinion.
have 2 more minutes.
Thank you. I had a contra-opinion about the counter-terrorism bill. There were serious reservations. In fact, certain aspects of the counter-terrorism bill exacerbated, enhanced the shortcomings of the PTA. I want to, please,
Honourable,
I have only limited time.
Especially with regard to trade unions.
Especially, I want to tell you, Mr. Minister, Singapore has an internal security act. UK has counter-terrorism and security acts. I certainly believe that we should have our own. But the provisions should achieve the objectives. The objectives of promoting national security and preventing terrorism, not victimizing people based on their color, creed, political ideology, and what they stand for. Human rights activists, civil society activists, media personnel should not be victimized purely because they have an opposing opinion. Moreover, I think when you talk of terrorism, we have to look at the root causes of terrorism. Discrimination, economic marginalization, exploitation, exclusion from development, sentiments of victimhood, and also lack of political empowerment. These issues must be addressed, and it should be included in an inclusive human development program. And we should, as a country and a nation, achieve national security through brotherhood, harmony, preventing discrimination, eradicating racism, using ethnicity, religion, caste, creed, or any other tool to achieve one's political ends. Just last, Madam Chairperson, I would like to make a recommendation, specifically with regard to National Security Council. You know very well that the National Security Council in Sri Lanka has been established under the Public Security Ordinance, Regulation number 1 of 1999. I personally believe that it would not suffice. There is an urgent need for the establishment of the National Security Council. Give it legal authority and legitimacy through an act of parliament, through legislation. You can always emulate the National Security Act of 1947, as in the United States. You can always emulate the Civil Contingencies Committee, the so-called COBRA Committee, Cabinet Office Briefing Room A system that you have in UK. It was established through the 2004 Civil Contingencies Act. Please focus your attention on those aspects which will promote the national security and the terrorism prevention measures and methodologies through such acts. Avasana Vashin, මට ගරු මුලසනාරූඩ ගරු මන්ත්‍රීතුමිය අවස්ථාවක් ලබා දෙන බොහොම කෙටි වෙලාවකින් සාරාංශගතව අපේ අදහස ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න. ත්‍රස්තවාදය නිසා පියෙක් අහිමි වුණු පුතෙක් හැටියට මම බොහොම පැහැදිලිව කියන්නට ඕන අප රට තුල ත්‍රස්තවාදයට ඉඩක් නැහැ. ත්‍රස්තවාදය වළක්වාලීම සඳහා එයට හේතු වන කරුණු කාරණා පිළිබඳව හොඳ අවබෝධයක් ලබාගෙන සමාජීය දේශපාලනික ආර්ථික ආගමික සංස්කෘතික හෝ වෙනත් ඌනතාවෙන් අඩුපාඩුකම් සොයා බලා නැවතත් වරක් රටක් තුළ ත්‍රස්තවාදයක් නිර්මාණය නොවන්නට අපි කටයුතු කරන්නට ඕන. පැහැදිලිව මතක තබා ගන්නට ඕන. කවුරු හෝ කොතැනක හෝ අන්තවාදයේ ක්‍රියාත්මක කරනවා නම් එයට සිංහල දමිළ මුස්ලිම් බර්ගර් ભેදයක් නැහැ. අන්තවාදයට ඉඩ තබන්නට දෙන්නට බෑ. අපි හැමෝම දන්නවා අන්තවාදය තුලින් නියත වශයෙන්ම යම් තාක් දුරකට ත්‍රස්තවාදයකට මුල පුරන ප්‍රධානතම කාරණාවක් බවට පත් වෙනවා. ත්‍රස්තවාදයේ වැළැක්වීමේ පනත තුල තිබෙන ඒ ප්‍රතිපාදන මේ රජය පාවිච්චි කරලා තිබෙනවා විවිධ ක්‍රියාකාරීන්ගේ දඩයන් කරන්නට. In fact, you should pay your attention to state-sponsored terrorism, using the state infrastructure to apprehend people just because they believe in a particular political ideology. තමන්ගේ දේශපාලන මතිමතාන්තර කේන්ද්‍රගත කරගෙන මේ ත්‍රස්තවාදයේ වැළැක්වීමේ පනත පාවිච්චි කිරීම වැරදි. ඒ නිසා කරුණා කරලා ලෝ කමිෂන් එක නීති කොමිසම ඉතාමත්ම ප්‍රවීණ නීතිඥයින් ජනාධිපති නීතිඥ රොමේෂ් ඩිසිල්වා මැතිතුමා මනෝහර ඩිසිල්වා මැතිතුමා සංජීව ජයවර්ධන මැතිතුමා එතුමන්ලා ඇතුළු තවත් කණ්ඩායමක් ඉතාමත්ම ප්‍රගතිශීලී වැදගත් යෝජනා රසක් යෝජනා කරලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ සංශෝධන ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න. ඒ සංශෝධන ක්‍රියාත්මක කරලා ත්‍රස්තවාදයේ වැළැක්වීම ජාතික ආරක්ෂාව තහවුරු කිරීම වගේම මානව අයිතිවාසිකම් දේශපාලන අයිතිවාසිකම් සිවිල් ආගමික සංස්කෘතික අයිතිවාසිකම් පොදු ජනයාගේ අයිතිවාසිකම් සුරැකෙන ආකාරයේ ප්‍රගතිශීලී පනතකට මුල පුරන්නේ කියලා මම ඉල්ලීමක් කරන බොහොම ස්තුතියි.